much. Well, I'm Julian. I'm the director of music at the Al-Ain Singers, and I'm exceptionally delighted to be speaking to Philip this evening. And thank you all for joining us via Zoom. This may have happened face to face, but here we are with technology, and the technology works, which is really lovely. So this evening is going to be part This Is Your Life with Michael Aspel. Some of you will remember that, and half wisdom from Philip. I'm sure I won't embarrass you, Philip, if I go through your biography briefly, just so everyone can really feel the gravity of who you are.
That's very kind of you, but gravity doesn't come into it.
Well, so Philip Moore, you were born in 1943 and educated at the Royal College of Music in London. You won the Walford Davies Prize for organ playing and the Olympus, Turpin and Reed Prizes at the Royal College of Organists exams. You hold a BMUS from the University of Durham and honorary fellowships from the Royal School of Church Music, the Guild of Church Musicians and the Academy of St Cecilia for services to church music. In 2008, the Archbishop of York awarded you the Order of St William. And in 2016, the Archbishop of Canterbury, it's nice to get them both in there, awarded you the Cranmer Award for Worship for your contribution to the English choral tradition as a composer, arranger, and performer. After graduating from the RSCM, you taught for 3 years at Eton College, moving to Canterbury Cathedral in 1968 as assistant organist to Dr. Alan Wicks. In 1974, you became organist and master of the choristers at Guildford Cathedral, and in 1983, organist and master of the music at York Minster. As a composer, you have written extensively, primarily music for choir and organ, but also music for chamber ensembles. You have over 400 titles of music for the church, including carols, anthems, and liturgical music. Your music is published by all the major houses, including Oxford University Press, Banks Music Publications, Boosey and Hawkes, Faber Music, and Encore Publications. Commissions for Westminster Abbey, Salisbury Cathedral, Manchester Cathedral, Exultate Singers, the Ebor Singers, Exon Singers, Chelmsford Cathedral, Derby Cathedral, and St John's College, Oxford. In 2019, you were commissioned to write a new carol for the annual service of 9 lessons and carols broadcast from King's College, Cambridge. And now you have been commissioned to write an anthem for the 50th anniversary of the Al-Ain Singers. We are in good stock with you. And Philip, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're delighted to spend some time with you. So I wonder if we might start by having a little chat about your early career, including your composition teachers and their influence on your style. So I wonder if you could start off by describing your early career, giving us an idea as to who your teachers were, how their influence has been sort of woven into your compositional technique.
Thank you, Julian. It's a bit of a mouthful, that, isn't it? But I'm 78 after all, so I think I've always composed, even as a small child, and I used to go to bed and think of tunes which were running around my head, and eventually I wrote them down. And I think it was probably somebody called Christopher Le Fleming who first noticed that I was writing music. I had piano lessons from him, and he was a wonderful piano teacher, but he suddenly saw some manuscript in my briefcase, and he said, "What's that?" And he had a terrific knowledge of the English language and poetry and so forth. And his autobiography, which is called Journey into Music by the Slow Train, is probably out of print, but if you can get a hold of a copy, it is the most wonderful read. And I think he looked at some of the stuff. And when I first started writing, the only two composers I thought were worth any while at all were Bach and Handel. And that was encouraged by the fact that we sang the St. Matthew Passion at school. Then we used to sing excerpts from the Messiah in our local village church. And although my mother and father were extremely musical, my father played a lot of Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and the Romantics, as well as Bach. And those all rather left me cold. And then I think the influences were from the composers that I heard on the wireless, as we used to call it in those days, and also the records that my father used to bring home. Sorry. He bought one of those radiograms, and he used to bring in a new record home every week. And why he bought Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony, I cannot imagine, but he did. And that was the start of my love of Vaughan Williams music. Then he brought home the John Allen Piano Concerto. And we think of John Allen probably with his church music, but his piano concerto is a different sort of thing altogether. It has the most magical slow movement. Can I just play a little bit of the slow movement? It influenced me so much. His orchestration was superb, and he had muted trumpets, and people used to accuse him of hobnobbing with jazz trumpeters. And then I heard Michael Tippett, the Double Concerto and the Child of Our Time. I'm a great lover of Hindemith. I think he is a rather underrated composer, and some people find his music very very dry, but things like Matterstone Mahler, the Nobilissimo, I don't know what it's called, Visione, wonderful pieces, and the three sonatas for organ, which I play. And I think all these people were influencing me more than church music composers until I heard Herbert Howells. And the first piece of Howells that I heard was his Te Deum Collegium Regale, which was the first piece, as you probably know, that he wrote as a result of a conversation with Eric Milner White, who at the time was Dean of King's and then became Dean of York. And those long melismas and so forth, and the final cadence, which is, I can, if you don't know, just this final cadence is fantastic. And he draws the cadences out in the most fantastic manner. And so I then became totally obsessed with Herbert Howells. And I suppose those were the influences. When I went to the Royal College of Music, I wanted to learn with Herbert Howells, but I was assigned Alan Ridout, and I was initially disappointed. But Alan was very good at stopping me from writing sub Vaughan Williams. The other thing I discovered from Alan was that Howells gave far more time to his female pupils than to his male pupils. So I think I probably wouldn't have been I wouldn't have got as much from him, but I did get to know him, and he was an extraordinary character. He had a wonderful way with words. You had to wait before he got to the point, but it was always couched in the most eloquent language. And he was an enigma in some ways, and he used to stare at people in the hall of the RCM. And he stared at me one day, and he suddenly came up to me and he said, do you know this piece? And it was the Sarabande for a Siciliano for a high ceremony. I said, no, I don't, Dr. Howells. Would you like a copy? It's rather good. And so I said, yes, please. And stupidly didn't get him to sign it. But anyway, I still have the copy. So it's a treasured copy. And then as a student, I got to know Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven. And I think all these composers have made an impact on me. The other composer who has had a big influence on me is Stanford, which is not surprising because he wrote a lot of church music. But I've come to know his symphonies, his 6 symphonies, I think they are. And his concertos, of which the violin concerto is an absolute winner. If you listen to the slow movement of the violin concerto, it's a magical piece. And his book on musical composition is also very interesting. And he has all sorts of practical tips, which are well worth studying. And I think the other thing that influenced me was actually taking choirs of my own. When I was at Canterbury, Alan Wicks would say to me, "Oh, will you write something?" And he was so good with difficult music and awkward music that I didn't really get to know the difficulties I was writing myself. But it was when I went to Guildford and presented them with one or two pieces of mine that I began to learn what worked and what didn't work. And I think it's a constant learning process. I think you learn by trial and error, and you do write pieces which don't work as well as others, I think. And various friends listen to stuff. My wife is very good at spotting not quite the right chord. I always play things to her that I've written, and she'll remember a spot where she thinks the chord isn't quite right. And the other thing I learned from Stanford more than anybody, I think, is that I don't divide very much. And it was my predecessor, Francis Jackson, who incidentally is now 104. He said Bach wrote the St. John Passion in 4-part harmony. The Messiah, apart from Lift Up Your Heads, is 4-part harmony. Don't divide unless you really want to do so. And there are 1 or 2 places in piano where I do, but only for big moments. So that, I think, is a summary of my
Thank
life
you. No, I particularly love the fact that you've referenced the Fifth Symphony of Vaughan Williams. I mean, that's dear to many people's hearts. Yes, yeah. And you may know that David Briggs recently has created a transcription of it, which I look forward to hearing. And the excerpt you played earlier on, not from that, but it was very jazz influenced, as you were saying, yes. As well. And also, I mean, you may know I'm the membership secretary of the Herbert Howells Society, so it's very good to hear about Howells.
Yes,
yes. And I just wonder, we often think of him having 3 distinct periods of composition and how his language has changed in those three times. Has your language changed? Are there times in your life when you've really encompassed a particular style and then moved on?
I'm not conscious that I have done so, but I listen to a lot of modern music. You know, James Macmillan, for instance, who is a very, very fine composer. And I listen to what he does, and I think he's probably the greatest of the modern composers. And the way he approaches textures and words, it's all extraordinarily interesting. The other thing about Howells is that I think what we sometimes forget about Howells is that it was his orchestral and chamber music by which he was first known. The church music came rather later, and his 2 piano concertos are wonderful. And the second one was booed, and I think Sir Malcolm Sargent didn't prepare the score properly, and there were mistakes in the score, and it was a disaster. But they've both been recorded now. And of course, Hymnus Paradisi, I can't remember the Daily Telegraph correspondent it was, but he wrote a piece some time ago saying he thought this was the greatest piece of choral music that has come out of this country. And he bore in mind Gerontius, which is quite something to say. But whether I agreed with him or not, but I can see why he said it. And we went to the prom performance of it in about 2016 or whenever.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
And it was just wonderful, and the applause went on and on and on.
I think the structure of that piece is particularly fine, and it's really well balanced as well. I think that's why it works. Yeah.
I know. So it's a wonderful, wonderful piece.
Thank you very much. And of course, the Te Deum by Howells Colreg. It's possibly my favorite piece of Howells, and almost church music in superb.
Yes, good.
Yeah, no, as the tenors reach up at the final cadence, it's just marvelous. I'd like to move on to Guildford, your transition to there, and then to York Minster, if I may.
Yes.
I suppose the question is, quite cheekily, how does one follow Barry and Francis? And you had the honour of following Dr. Barry Rose as organist and master of choristers to Guildford in 1974. And I was just reading again Simon Carpenter's book here.
Oh yes.
Which is a lot of fun. The beat is irrelevant. Barry Rose in the early years of Guildford Cathedral Choir, and Peter Wright, who was your sub-organist for a while in 1977. Considered the problems facing any successor to Barry.
Yeah.
And he wrote, and I quote, "It is difficult enough taking over a job where everything is running at peak, but Philip Moore's task at Guildford was uniquely so in the cathedral world in taking over one man's creation. There were some who simply refused to believe that anybody after Barry could run the choir. As one lay clerk put it, even if St. Cecilia herself had taken over, there would still be someone who would moan." So I'm just wondering, looking back at the time, your first post as the #1 man, how did you approach the transition of taking over a choir dedicated to the man who had created the music tradition there?
It was pretty onerous, and I think for various reasons. One is that there was no choir school. The boys came from Lanesborough, which is a very good arrangement, but it wasn't a residential choir school. And Barry kept the repertoire very small, and I came from Canterbury, where the repertoire was very big. It was a repertoire. It wasn't just the choir sight reading, which can happen. But Alan really took church music into uncharted waters. And I think meeting a repertoire which was so small, the first thing I wanted to do was to expand it. And I think I loved the way the choir sang. It was very, very polished. I think I wanted to open the boys out a bit in the sound they made. And because it was my first #1 job, I made mistakes. But there were various things that helped. The dean and chapter at the time were absolutely wonderful and very welcoming. And Tony Bridge, who was the dean at the time, he was an outstanding priest in his own way, and valued the arts as a way of communicating the message of God, in that religion and Christianity are not things that can be talked about in words so much. You need music and art to lift the soul onto another plane. And he was a great believer in that. And I took that with me from him. And the other thing that helped both in York and in Guildford was that my predecessors stayed out of the way. I think that is terribly important. Barry actually came back to the cathedral for a memorial service for Sir Edward Morph, who was the architect.
Yes.
But he otherwise didn't darken the doors. I think he kept his ear close to the ground. And there was one lay clerk there who was a very, very good singer. And I remember after Matins one day, he and Tony Froggatt, my then assistant, and I were talking. And this tenor was going on and on about how I should do things differently and so forth. And he wasn't being unkind, but he was just having a few of his little termly moans. And I listened and made a few defensive comments. And then Tony Froggatt, my assistant at the time, said, I'm glad he's not around, i.e. Barry. And this lay clerk, what? He said, yeah, he did his time here and he produced a really good choir and he's doing something else now. I'm glad he's not here. And that was just wonderful because it shut the lay clerk up totally. And I never had a word, a squeak of complaint out of him again. But I think judging a choir that you don't know is pretty difficult. You have to sense the various temperatures that come around, and with a cathedral choir, as opposed possibly to a college chapel choir, you're pulling together people who've been at work all day, and a variety of emotions. Some people might have had a hell of a day. Some people might have had an argument with their wife and so forth. And you're pulling all these strands together, children who've been at school. And it's quite tricky. And you learn tricks of your own. But it was, and after my first broadcast, I remember Barry wrote a very, very charming letter saying he thought the first one was better than others that had come from Guildford. So I was able just to relax and a bit. Following Francis was completely different because I think the choir would sing very well if it was Francis's music or Bairstow's music. Francis is an incredibly musical person. I mean, Barry is extremely musical, but there's something about Francis which puts them on another plane altogether. And he didn't understand why people couldn't sing what was in front of them. And I remember writing a piece for him once. It was an impromptu for his 70th birthday, because he'd done one for Bairstow. And he was going to play it at a conference, and we went into the Minster. And I could tell he'd not opened the copy. And he was just looking at it with his specs slightly on his nose, but looking up. How does that go? I see. And it was all there. It was extraordinary. In about 10 minutes, the piece was under his fingers. And that was his, that was in a sense his downfall, because he found teaching a choir a piece of music was really difficult, because he didn't have to teach himself music. It was all there. But he was, he was much loved by people, and he is a much loved character, and we're just so thrilled that he's still with us.
Absolutely.
And in mind, he's as sound as you can possibly want. His hearing's not too good, but he's still living on his own.
I know. Yes, extraordinary man. And I when I took my choir to York 5 or 6 years ago, he wandered up the organ loft unannounced. Of course, it's his organ loft as well as yours, and he was just so charming about what we were doing. And lovely man. I was going to just sort of reflect on York. A larger organ, larger acoustic, larger group of singers day by day, a medieval foundation for you. And succeeding Francis, one of the fathers of 20th century church music. I think he'd been there from 1946, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And I want to pick up on this theme of the composer-organist as a type, because if I may, I mean, York has a huge tradition of 17th, 18th, 19th century composers of chants, for the organists, and then Tertius Noble, Edward Bairstow, Francis Jackson, and Philip Moore. And I'm just wondering, are we losing the tradition and the art of the composer organist in our cathedrals and our chapels? Is that dying out, do you think?
I think it probably is, in the same way that a lot of the top recitalists are now not cathedral organists. I mean, when I was at Canterbury, Alan was a very, very fine recitalist. Francis was a fine recitalist. And Arthur Wills, again, fine composer, fine player. And so I think probably we are, but I think the job of being a cathedral organist or director of music is much more all-encompassing now, and also they're paid better. So these, which means they don't. I mean, Francis started doing recitals partly because he wasn't paid very well, and he found he could make a nice little extra bit of money because of it. And I mean, he enjoyed doing it too, and he loved doing it. But I think probably when college chapels and cathedrals commission a composer, they often commission somebody from outside the tradition, which is always very worthwhile doing. But you can get some pretty startling things, like the Tippett St. John service, which I think is superb. But I think the eyebrows were raised like mad when that appeared. Yeah. And for a long time, I thought, gosh, this is so modern. But I think I think this tradition of composing and cathedral work is probably disappearing a bit.
I mean, I think Malcolm Archer comes to mind as another organist, director of music, composer.
Yes.
But they're few and far between these days.
I think they are, actually. Yes. David Halls.
Yes, of course.
Salisbury has written quite a lot of stuff, which is very good.
Requiem recently, yes, as well.
He wrote. He went in for a competition for a piece to be played after the Advent Carol service in York, and he won it.
Yes. I think that's recently, isn't it?
Recently. It is only a couple of days ago. Yes.
Of course, Simon Lowell. So the names are coming out now of people who. I'm shooting myself in the foot.
No, not at all. But I think what the advantage of being a cathedral musician and composing is that you understand intimately that you have to have pieces which you don't have to relearn each time. And we've commissioned things occasionally, but not often. I remember once I did a joint commission when I was at Guildford with St. George's, Windsor and St. Albans for the 3 choirs festival, a wonderful piece. But we had to learn it each time we performed it, which is a bit of a nuisance, really.
Especially for a working cathedral choir. Bread is we bump in 19-minute rehearsal and we sing evensong.
Exactly.
That leads really beautifully on to your approach to writing music for your Minster choir. I mean, obviously you knew the gentlemen, as it was then, intimately, and their strengths and weaknesses. What concessions did you perhaps give to that when you were writing for the Minster?
For the Minster, I think probably making the harmonies a bit more slow moving. If you look at Francis's music, for instance, the harmony moves quite slowly, and he Howells, he pulls out the cadences. Bairstow, not so much. Some of Bairstow's music, I think, is wonderful, but it's a little bit over-harmonized sometimes. But you have to remember that some of the pieces he wrote were when he was at either Wigan Parish Church or Leeds Parish Church.
Yes.
But I think it's the harmonic pace, which of course Howells got fantastically well with Howell St. Paul's service, where the harmony moves very slowly. But I think I learned that from looking at Francis's pieces.
Yes, and there's a lovely YouTube of you conducting St. Paul's service in York Minster. Yes. And it's just, the pace is perfect for that building. Yes. And the harmony. It works really lovely, beautifully. So I'd just like to perhaps move on to specific compositions now and the commission. I'm going to return to Peter Wright, if I may. And again, he talks in the book about you being a gifted composer, and that your repertoire gained some magnificent homegrown pieces, such as the extended anthem, All Wisdom Cometh from the Lord. And as you know, it was written for Lanesborough's school 50th anniversary service. And it's no secret that I've championed this piece in particular. I absolutely adore it.
Thank you so much.
I think I've conducted it 5 or 6 times at York and New College and various other places in the last 10 years. And it uses what I will call a Moorish compositional trait. So that might get into the lexicon now, but there we are. And it's similar to the end of your evening prayers, and you either using a plain song tone or a chorale to heighten the listener's awareness of text. I just want to show you those watching tonight what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can see on your screen the first excerpt here. There we are, it's coming now. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about. It's this use of da da dee 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 da dum da 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 dee 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 and so on, and that just weaves through the end of this beautiful, beautiful piece, and it goes on towards the end. And I think the other piece is a piece dear to Judy's heart, as she was mentioning earlier, which is Evening Prayers. And we'll perhaps talk a bit about that later, I think, how you came up with that. But again, it uses this beautiful chorale here, Nunt kom de Heiden Highland, and you work that through the end of the piece into the soprano line there. And it just brings this poignancy to it, and almost grounds the listener to something that is old and known, but within a sort of a new context. So just to go back to us, there we are. What I wanted to do, if you don't mind, is just play 2 short excerpts of those pieces, and then if we could reflect on that compositional technique.
Yeah.
Thank you. So here's the first one, and it's the last few minutes or so of this all wisdom cometh from the Lord. absolutely stunning piece. And the
Thank you.
the second excerpt is just here. No, sorry, let's try and find it. There we are. I'll play this now. You should be able to hear this, I hope. So just take it from about here. And now the chorale starts. Thank you for indulging me, because they're two of my favorite pieces in the whole world.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you so much.
Really are. So this device that you use. Oh, I need to stop that. Sorry. Bit of psalm, it's always nice. There we are. So I'm just wondering, perhaps if you could muse on that, because even in the commission, you're using a hymn tune, and you come back to that. So I don't want to give too much away yet, because we've got a bit of time for that in a moment. But if perhaps, especially evening prayers, where did the inspiration come for that?
In evening prayers, it's quite simple. The prayers are at the back of a book, Letters and Papers from Prison. And Bonhoeffer was a very musical man. And he quotes Nun kommt der Heiden Heiland in one of the chapters. And when I was searching around for words for this particular group of singers, I thought that would be lovely to finish with that chorale somehow. So the fugue subject is based on it, as you can see. And then it's really that was the thing that gave me the inspiration for using Nun kommt der Heiden Heiland. As far as the plain song in in All Wisdom. One of my desert island pieces, as I'm sure for many of you, is the De Rufflet Requiem, which the first time I heard it, I thought, wow, this is just amazing. The first time I heard it was in Bath Abbey, the day after the Aberfan disaster. My sister was singing in the performance, and it was the full orchestral version, which sounds like Debussy La Mer or something. And after that tragedy, that terrible tragedy the day before, this was the most incredibly poignant performance. But I didn't know the piece at all. I'd struggled with some of his organ pieces, but then I've always loved Plainsong anyway. And then hearing him use it in that sort of way, I think has been an influence. And with All Wisdom, I wanted to tie the text down right at the end. It was a celebration of the school, and Simon Della, son of Alfred, was the assistant headmaster and in the choir. And he has a lovely baritone voice. And so a solo for him was perfect. So that's why there's a bass solo. And then I thought I wanted to feature the trebles somehow. So I searched around and found the text. And initially I was just going to plonk chords down and the Plainsong would be sung in the way that it is in Lo God Is Here, which I think you may know. And then I sort of found that it fitted sort of with the opening music in All Wisdom. So I thought, let's try that. And it seemed to work. So I wrote some of that piece when I was running a choir course in the States, in Akron, Ohio, the Diocese of Ohio. And the deadline was drawing near, and I was having to rush away when the choir was having a break, trying to complete things. And I remember writing the piece out on the airplane coming home with a felt tip pen. And the person sitting in front of me, she kept on moving her seat, so my pen was flying around. Anyway, that's a bit of nonsense. But I think that's how that came about. And Timothy Story writes criticisms, very good criticisms of music in one of the organ magazines. And he did say I used Plainsong too much, but I begged to disagree, but I don't mind. So I think that's how it all came about. And then the piece that I've written for you, you were very specific, which is a great help. Rather than somebody saying, "Will you just write a piece for us?" You said the sort of thing you wanted, and that gave me some very clear guidelines. And somehow Slane, Be Thou My Vision, which is a tune I've always loved, seemed to fit in. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much. And that really moves beautifully on to the commission piece. And we're delighted that you agreed to write for us for the 50th anniversary. And you're absolutely right. I sent quite a few texts through, and you shuffled through them, and there are quite a lot. And it does create a beautiful extended anthem in four sections. And if you're happy, I'll put the score on the screen.
Please do.
And we can just work through each section. That'd be really amazing. Thank you. I'll be guided by you. So, Philip, if you'd like to talk us through the first section here.
Yes, well, that obviously is based on Slane. It reminds me of one chorister we interviewed. We always used to get them to say a psalm to see if they could read slightly difficult words, and he was given Psalm 84, and he started off by saying, "Oh how am I able," which is a lovely interpretation. So that's basically the tune, and I've slightly fiddled around with the rhythms. soul hath a desire. And yes, so that's really what happens right at the beginning. It just sets the scene, if you like, with a very gentle accompaniment, which is just shadowing the voices.
So we'll move on, and then we've got us the second section, PN1.
Yeah.
This lovely 7/8 rhythm and 5/8. Dum da dum dum bum ba bum bum.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think actually one of my influences has been Walton. My mother pointed this out years ago. And she said, I think you've been influenced by Walton. And I said, Mother, I think you're right. And he was a sort of seminal composer. His love of exciting rhythms in Belshazzar, for instance, and the Te Deum, and what is the piece he wrote with words by W.H. Auden, the 12.
Oh, yes.
I think, and of course Tippett. The sort of almost sprung rhythms that Tippett uses, which somebody likened once to the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins, in which he uses very sprung rhythms which leap the text across, and so I think that's the influence here. One of the things I try to do is, before choir comes in, is not to have anything too complicated. So the bar before we praise thee, O God, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, so that the choir gets an established tempo.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if you have a compound and simple tempo mixed, it can be difficult for a choir to find exactly where they come in.
It's a very, very strong downbeat in that 7/8 bar, isn't
exactly,
it?
Exactly.
Bum, 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 bum.
Yes, that's right.
So that's very exciting. There's this movement of it all, and it's rhythmic, isn't it? It's five
Yes.
and the syncopated Lord. That's
Yes.
that strong rhythm you're talking about, I think.
I think it is probably, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is. Yes.
And then this slower, the Father everlasting. Of course, this is the Te Deum text, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. So
just tell me to stop if you want to talk about anything.
No, I think that's fine. There's something else I'm going to point out in a moment.
Yeah.
I always like a little bit of interplay between the voices to the cherubim and seraphim, or voices piling up, as if the cherubim and seraphim are piling up to cry out. So that's what's behind that.
And this lovely moment here ends this movement, doesn't it?
Yes. Cry.
Little harmonic shift here as well. Very good.
Yep.
Then got a bit of holies, and building up again.
Yep.
Almost Leighton-esque here. You know, two voices together.
Leighton, we used to sing quite a lot of Leighton. Francis was very keen on it, and I didn't do much in Guildford, but Francis was very keen on it, and we took on the 2 Leighton canticles, and the responses, and also his Missa Brevis, and he was a very fine composer with a very distinctive style. My one little quarrel with Leighton is that he would sometimes put difficult vowels on high notes in the responses and lead us not. The trebles are singing lead on the top G, P, P. And this is something that Howells would never do. And if you look at the end of, say, the Gloucester service, which I think is one of his finest, all the vowels at the highest notes are just so carefully judged. So let's move on. Yes, that's fine. And we gradually descend to my song shall be always of the loving kindness of the Lord. One of the things I've missed more than anything in my retirement is the Psalms. It was an integral part of my daily diet, if you like. And in fact, I still read the day's Psalms every morning because I just so love them. And there's some angry bits, of course, but there's some wonderful, wonderful prayers in them as well. Then we merge into another interpretation of another appearance as slain. For I have said, yeah, there we go. Good.
Okay, and we end here.
Then another paean, which is vaguely based on the music right at the beginning.
Da 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 dum dum da da dum. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is lovely too. Yeah, it works here.
Good. And yes.
Yes.
In
the new text.
Yes.
And of course, you know, I had Hal's in mind when I chose this text. You can imagine.
Of course. That was a piece we used to do at the Minster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's Alan Wicks once said to me, people often used to send him music, and he would sum it up in about 2 seconds flat. And he once looked at a piece and he said, too many words and not enough notes. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, think of and the glory of the Lord from Handel's Messiah. And that's the model of not much text, wonderful music, and stretching the text out. And actually, something else that has occurred to me is that it was Herbert Sumption, whose music I love. He once said that your choral music should sound well, even if you don't have the words. So if it makes sense as a musical item, that makes a lot of sense, I think. Now, one of the things here, and one of the things that Stanford says in his book, is music should have a firm bass line. And this is an instance of where I've sort of adopted that, I think, with the pedal rising. And apparently Brahms, when pupils used to take pieces to Brahms, he would often blot out the middle part and just test the melody and the bass line. And that is quite a good way of testing out what you've written. So I think this a firm bass line at this stage just builds the thing up to the for the Lord God is a light and defense.
And this is possibly my favorite section, actually. Whenever there are thirds in the treble or soprano line, it just brings a really added sort of frisson to it. I love this.
Yes. And the thing is that I try not to do that effect too much, otherwise it acts like a blunt sword. Yeah.
Yeah. And this lovely moment here.
Yes.
Yes.
And again, I think I stretched it out rather than godly life. A godly life, I think, is important. Then a nice. I hope the trumpets stop at Christchurch. Working.
We'll do it justice, so do I. And of course, it's crotchet equals crotchet here, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, good. It works beautifully. Yeah. And
we just go into 3/2.
This cascading down of the right hand as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a little slowing up here now into the sort of section here. Epilogue.
These words are amongst my favorite of all the Psalms. Now, do you know, does anybody know a piece by Bairstow called Lord, I Call Upon Thee?
No.
I think Blessed City, Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge, wonderful pieces, but it's Lord, I Call Upon Thee, which I think is his best. And it finishes with these words, and it was lovely to. Was that one of the texts that you suggested, Julian? Yeah, I just love it, and it fits with the Slane.
It's a Compline text. I'm pretty sure I chose.
It is. Oh, it is indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love the Office of Compline. So the
Oh
text,
yes.
yeah.
So do I.
And then here we are, Be Thou My Vision.
Yeah.
Through. And with a little soprano over the top here.
Yep.
Almost plain song like again.
That's right. Yes.
Rest of the choir. Da, da, dee, 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 da, da, da.
That's it.
That's it. And we go to the beautiful ending here, where there's another typical Philip Moore-ism here, I think, in the harmony.
Oh, is it? Yes.
Yeah, it is. The D flat. It just works.
I love flattened leading notes.
Yeah. So it's a really, really exciting and beautiful piece, Philip, and thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing that now. And thank you for explaining how it all fits together.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the commission, which was a real joy to complete, partly because you gave so much detail, and because there was a lot to sort out. It was a very meaty commission rather than just will you write us an anthem.
Yeah.
You gave me a very clear idea of what you would like, and I'm just glad you think it's what you had hoped for.
I very much do, and thank you. And just for those listening and watching, the premiere will be on the 13th of August 2022 in Christchurch, Oxford, and we hope you will be able to join us.
We will, yes.
And both you and your wife, and there'll be a drinks afterwards. So thank you so much. What I'd like to do, I've had one question from given to me earlier. And then I might open the floor for a few minutes if that's okay. Thank you.
Fine.
And the question is from Helen, which says, which phrase or moment of harmony will make us gasp and admire this composition? Perhaps there'll be more than one, she says.
I couldn't possibly say. I think it's up to your own feelings about it. And different people will react in different ways to each passage, I think. So yeah. I'm sorry, that's not a very satisfactory answer, but that's
no, absolutely. And the quiet moments are beautifully reflective, and again that build up in thirds, the harmony just crunches down beautifully there. That for me, that's I think the climax of the piece. I don't know if it's meant to be.
I think it is actually, yes.
Okay.
It is.
Good. Yeah.
Let's modest about it.
Go on, Helen.
Would you like to be less modest about it, Mr. Moore? Because there must be something which makes you sort of, your spine tingle. You're thinking, absolutely whopping.
I'll have a look at my copy. When you're listening to your own music, you don't know what's going to make your spine tingle, actually. There was a piece of mine which was broadcast about a month or two ago from the Charles Wood Festival, and it was an arrangement of an Irish hymn tune I'd made, and there was a bit that took me by surprise and made my spine tingle. But I think probably, let's see, I think page 22,
Yep.
who are wearied by the changes and chances of this fleeting world. Going down from, yes, I think probably my spine will tingle going from world to the next chord. This is one of those peculiar things. I love first inversion chords. I don't know why. It's just this is the way my brain is wired, I think. So, I think probably the end. Ending a piece is incredibly hard. And I remember once, shortly after I came here to York, writing a piece for John Habgood's Enthronement. And I played it to John Scott Whiteley, my assistant. And I said, is that ending right? And he said, no, it's not. I'd finished on an A major chord, and he said it needs a C major chord, and he was absolutely right. And sometimes the end is the hardest bit to get right, and partly because Howells got it so right in things like the Te Deum, and in the Gloucester service, and in St. Paul's service, where he drags the cadences out. So endings are very difficult. Is that okay, Helen? Is good. Do fire any other questions. I don't mind what you ask me.
Frances.
Thank you. I was wondering, there are composers of church music who make something of a thing about them having no faith at all, or even being atheist. Is faith important to you in the setting of church texts?
Yes, it is. I'm an active Christian, and I think for Christianity is a strange thing, because for some people it's quite easy. My parents were very active Christians, but they never rammed religion down our throats. It was just an accepted thing. But I think if a composer who doesn't have any spiritual faith, I don't think it matters at all. Tippett doesn't, but he produced an amazing Magnificat and Magnificat. Vaughan Williams and Howells were both signed up agnostics, but both of them understood the scriptures more than you would ever imagine. And I don't know if you know, but over the original score of the Fifth Symphony, over the slow movement, the Romanza, were written the words, "He hath given me rest by his sorrows and life by his death." And that was actually in the original score, and that was cut out. And I have a feeling that his second wife, Ursula, was distinctly atheist. And I think any hint of Vaughan Williams sympathizing with faith was anathema to her. I once heard her on a broadcast. She suddenly said something like, "We don't worry about that sort of thing." But I think it doesn't worry me at all if a composer decides. I don't believe a word of this. I mean, John Rutter doesn't, but he's produced some amazingly good pieces, despite. And I think he actually gets himself into a Christianity frame of mind. So, is that a good answer? Is that okay, Frances?
Thank you very much. It was John Rutter I had in mind, actually, and I just can't. I feel it shows in his music in a way that it doesn't with Vaughan Williams or Tippett.
That's interesting. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Far
Frances.
away. Anybody
Anyone
else?
else who'd like to ask a question?
Don't be afraid.
Shall I ask mine? Although I
Please
think
do.
it's virtually been answered to some extent, and that was that I first came across your work when we sang the prayers of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and there were 3 of them. So you've got the morning, the prayer in the time of despair, and the evening prayer.
Yes.
The morning one I just found so moving. And I wondered which you find most satisfying. If you are asked to set invited to set a particular text, or you choose it, and you know, what do you find most inspiring about that?
Well, I think sometimes if somebody says, "Will you write us a piece?" and this was the case with the prayers, It was a group of 4 singers, which is why it doesn't divide, because we couldn't divide. There were just 4 singers. And they said, would I write something? And they said, anything will do. And I just, I think, although I love reading poetry, but I have a sort of ulterior motive, in that I'm often looking for words to set to music. And so searching around is frustrating, but satisfying as well. And there was just something about the text. I knew when I first saw them, my sister's husband made me aware of the book. And I read the prayers, the whole book, and then the prayers, and I thought, these are just wonderful. And so they must be set at some stage. And then suddenly the commission from Equinox came along, and I decided to set them. So so now, what else did you ask? Can you just repeat your question?
Which do you find most satisfying? Determining it yourself, or somebody else saying, I'd really love you to set All Shall Be Well, or like Julian did,
yes.
something celebratory, the Te Deum.
I don't, both are fine. I don't mind which way around it comes. If I'm given a text, it saves me a lot of time, because searching a text suitable can be a little time consuming. But so it works both ways. I mean, both are exciting and challenging.
Lovely. So I think what we'll do now is, just before I hand back to Judy to round things off, I'd like to give my thanks, Philip, for your time this evening and for your wonderful composition. We are so looking forward to learning it and singing it in August next year. Clearly, you're very busy in retirement, and I use that word advisedly. And you're composing. One quick question: are you directing any choirs at the moment?
We have what we call a little music group. We have a benefice where I live of 7 churches, and we have a little choir that sings when we have a service with all churches in the worshippers in one church.
Right. Oh, good.
And it's lovely to do. They're very they're not experienced. Most of the singers aren't experienced, but not all of them are not experienced. And they work very hard. And yesterday we had a rehearsal, and it was very cold yesterday. I thought, gosh, I don't want to turn out. And then it was just wonderful, because they were so willing and anxious to get their teeth into a piece. And I love having a choir to direct. And I must say, when I look at a cathedral choir singing, I do have longings to direct one, but I've been there and I've done that, and I've now got more time to compose. So that's lovely.
And I hope you won't mind me saying, appearing in pantomime.
Yes.
Well, had to get that in.
I don't mind at all. Well, in 2018, we had Jack and the Beanstalk, and I was a giant. And we've got somebody in the village. It's a wonderful village in which we live. It's very friendly, and we've got various talented people. And somebody wrote this hilarious script, and it was all, there were a lot of in jokes. But one of the interesting things, you've probably heard of James Norton, have you, the actor? Well, his parents lived just across from our house. And so there were various James Norton things which his father was saying. And I was an ugly sister, which I'm afraid I enjoyed hugely. I did quite a bit of acting at school, and I found the discipline of learning a text was a very, very good one. It really sharpened your brain, because you don't often sit down and learn a whole lot of words. and it was time consuming, but it was great fun. It went very well. And my opposite ugly sister is a retired lawyer from London, very clever man. He has a demeanour of a lawyer, but my goodness me, he was transformed, and he was the inspiration for everybody, actually.
Oh, thank you so much. It's lovely to hear that. I'll just hand back to Judy to round things off, but thank you very much, Philip.
And if there are any more questions you're reluctant to ask, please ask. But if you don't have any, that's fine.
Well,
Yes.
I'm wondering who's the Linda Snell in your village to write the piece, and who directs? Are you directing it?
No. It was written by one of our neighbours, who's a retired quantity surveyor.
Fantastic.
But I think I think he's watched a lot of Monty Python.
And what are you playing this year?
Well, I was the ugly sister. This was last week.
Oh, it's already happened.
It's already
right.
happened. Cinderella.
Right. Fantastic.
Jane had a question. Jane, did you have a question?
Does it feature an Ethel the Aardvark?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to ask, when you're composing, do you mind whether it's boy trebles or lady sopranos that sing the top line? What do you hear in your head when you're composing?
Just a very nice treble sound, soprano sound, but it doesn't worry me at all.
Okay. Thank you.
And do ask anything else you want.
Chris Coffin. Chris.
Yes, Chris.
I wondered whether the Monty Python reference there was to the famous tome Ethel the Aardvark Goes Quantity Survey.
No, it wasn't.
So we have some Monty Python experts among us as
right.
well.
Good.
So it falls to me to thank you enormously, Philip, for A, being here tonight, and B, doing this lovely composition, which we've all had the chance to have a look at our parts for next August. And I think we won't quite be sight reading it next year.
I'm sure you will.
I have put the Just Giving link on the chat, if you've all seen the chat, because we have a little bit to go. We've already had some fantastic donations, including from the Ousley Trust and a lovely family who remember when we were set up 50 years ago, somebody who was very involved with that. And just absolutely fantastic. If lots of people have given, if you haven't, do give. If you have given already and would like to give some more towards the commission, that would be grand. But otherwise, I think it falls to me to wish everybody a very happy Advent. Keep well, don't get COVID, stay away, and look forward to seeing as many people as possible at our next events in Chelmsford and Rochester, and then Christchurch, I think, which is going to be really, really exciting. So happy Christmas to everybody. Happy Advent. Keep well, keep vaccinated. As one who's just come from marshalling at the vaccination centre. All the best to everybody.
And very happy Christmas to you all, and happy Advent and Christmas. And just get vaccinated. And do let me know where you're singing, in case I happen to be nearby. It'd be lovely to hear you. Okay.
We will do. Thank you so much.
See you in August. Okay.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Philip. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.